Hey, wise grasshoppers. I am so sorry that I had to cancel our Zoom today, but hopefully this will take care of everything and you'll walk away from this PowerPoint with a better understanding of what to expect from your second FRQ on your AP U.S. Government and Politics exam on May the 11th. So I gave you two choices of FRQ. Here's the first one. This was a letter to James Madison in November of 1786, and George Washington wrote, "What stronger evidence can be given of the want of energy in our government than these disorders? If there exists not a power to check them, what security has a man of life, liberty, or property? To you, I am sure I need not add aught on this subject. The consequences of a lax or inefficient government are too obvious to be dwelt on. 13 sovereignties pulling against each other and all tugging at the federal head will soon bring ruin to the whole, whereas a liberal and energetic constitution, well guarded and closely watched to prevent encroachments, might restore us to that degree of respectability and consequence to which we had fair claim and the brightest prospect of attaining." So you are supposed to answer these three questions, A, B, and C. And again, if I were you, I would just write three little paragraphs and separate them by a line or two and not label A, B, or C. Because if you don't answer what they're asking for in A, but then you answer it in B, if it's not labeled, you could still potentially earn credit for part A. So here's what A was looking for. In the context of that passage, you were asked to describe George Washington's main concern regarding the Articles of Confederation. I have three examples here from three different FRQs. Thank you to the students who might not have known that I was going to choose theirs. So here's what we've got. Our first person said Washington's main concern about the Articles of Confederation was that it gave too much power to the states and not enough to the federal government. He says the states would argue too much and cause the federal government to collapse with them. He believes the articles are too weak and do not give enough power to the federal government for them to keep the states under control. So to get credit for part A, what your graders will be looking for is for the student to relate one weakness of the articles, such as a lack of national army capable of putting down Shays' rebellion, the central government's inability to tax the people, and its inability to regulate commerce among the states, to Washington's letter complaining of a want of energy or an inefficient government. So the person who provided the example for one did not really give a specific example to help do that. So I would be surprised if that example earned a point. Our second person said 13 autonomous states struggling against one another, doing as they wish, splitting the focus on the federal government. I don't think that would get credit. And number three, Washington is concerned that the AOC do not allow for an energetic executive and strong federal government. Washington says that the new government needs more checks and balances, as well as a separation of power between the branches to balance out the strong federal government. While that's true, we know that Washington was a Federalist and wanted a strong federal government. I don't know if that's necessarily calling out the weakness enough for the AOC. So again, you would need to say something along the lines of the Articles of Confederation being a weak central government unable to tax the states and instead could only request money is going to result in an inefficient government, a government that is not able to produce positive results or have staying power. So it doesn't look like any of our three folks would have gotten credit there, but hopefully you understand more what they're looking for part A. So see, you described what Washington said to get points, but then went further by providing an example. So really write your main ideas first and then go back and add what you can. Don't forget you'll have 15 minutes to do this. So maybe you could spend 5 minutes on part A, 5 minutes on part B, and 5 minutes on part C, and then you'll have 5 minutes to submit your answer. For part B, it asked you to describe one way in which the AOC distributed power between the states and the national government. Let's see what our folks said here. Our first person said that the Articles of Confederation allowed for states to be sovereign. Each state was allowed one vote in Congress, which was the only branch created under the Articles, allowing the states to vote for their representative in Congress, shared power between the states and the national government. So the rubric is looking for here that the student needs to explain that under the Articles, states retain their sovereignty and the national government had no means of enforcing its will. So this person is describing how the national government was created and how states were represented, but not necessarily how power was distributed. So I don't think number 1 would get a point. Number 2, the national government can make laws and amend the AOC. They can also request soldiers and money. However, the real power is found in the hands of the states. States regulate their trade, judicial matters, and coin their money. So that looks like that one would probably get a point right there. And potentially, maybe that answer could be used to earn a point for Part A as well, if this person did not label it Part B. And then our third person said the AOC focused more on a strong state government than a strong federal government. Good. The federal government could not, and then they list a lot of things they could not do. The states could do these things. So again, I feel like that's good enough that that would potentially earn a point. You're not necessarily using the word sovereignty itself, but you're suggesting that states have the power, whereas the federal government does not. So I think that could potentially earn a point there. But look at the word sovereignty. This is a good opportunity to use some of your vocabulary, folks. So maybe before you submit your answer, just think about what vocabulary you could throw out there to strengthen it a wee bit. Part C says, explain one reason why the drafters of the Articles of Confederation were worried about creating too much power in a central government. So our first person said the drafters of the AOC were worried about creating too much power in a central government because they believed it would take away the power of the states and of the people. They believe the central government taxing the states, for example, would cause them to have too much power over the states, and the states would lose any and all control they might have had over their own government. Okay, so that could work for B, just FYI. They were worried overall about a strong central government completely overshadowing states' rights. So without even looking at what they're looking for in the rubric here, I do think that that person who didn't earn a point for B just a moment ago could earn B with this answer, but I don't think they'll earn credit for C. Here's what the rubric is suggesting. The student must explain that the Articles of Confederation were written shortly after America declared its independence from Great Britain. So see a little bit of historical context there, folks. That Americans at the time were focused on avoiding a dictatorship and that creating a weak central government seemed the most logical way of doing so. So I don't really think that number 1 will earn credit. Let's see number 2. The USA has just declared their independence from a too powerful government, Great Britain. They don't want a central executive figure because they could become a king. There's no power of taxation because it was so much taxing that drove them to their literal breaking point. Yes, I think that could potentially earn something there, but see, this person really should have expanded after that and added that creating a weak central government would ensure that they were avoiding too much power in a central government. Just that one extra little sentence. I mean, you can even use the wording in the question that's given to you to make sure that you're really answering it as best you can. And then our third person, the AOC were drafted soon after the Declaration of Independence freed the U.S. from tyrannical rule of Great Britain. With this bad taste of a, I'm sure that's a typo on my part, powerful government fresh in mind, the drafters wanted to give the central government as little power as possible so America wouldn't turn into Great Britain. Absolutely. I think that would get full credit. Okay, so that's FRQ 1, but of course the second style, but that was your first choice. Let's continue on to the second option that I gave you. So after we've looked at the first FRQ that I gave you to practice, some things that kind of came up in my mind to help you better answer the questions are, again, I would forego labeling and just have them in 3 distinctly different areas for your answer to A, your answer to B, your answer to C. Just that way, in case you don't answer what A is asking in the space provided for A, you could potentially earn the points if you do it in the second paragraph. So that's one tip or one bit of information. A second thing would be to initially write down your ideas in your topic sentence, maybe restate what each letter is looking for, and then go back and make sure you've provided every single thing you can think of. If in Part B you listed things that the Articles of Confederation cannot do, make sure you go back and add that it could not do it because it was a weak central government. Don't just state that they were unable to do these things, state why. What was the logic behind that decision? Okay, and of course, reread everything before you press submit. Like I said, you'll have 15 minutes to do this FRQ. You could essentially devote 5 minutes for A, B, and C. Okay? Here is your second choice that I gave you. In 2017, President Trump and Republicans in Congress tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Among other things, this law requires Americans to purchase health insurance or pay a fine. Although President Trump is a member of the Republican Party and Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, they were unable to repeal the Affordable Care Act. After reading the passage, use your knowledge of U.S. government and politics to respond to A, B, and C. So, just like for choice 1, I took 3 FRQs and broke them down, and we'll decide based on the rubric that is provided by the source of this FRQ if those 3 responses earn credit for A, B, or C. So Part A asked you to describe an expressed constitutional power Congress could use to address the situation described above. Now, what I would do here is I would briefly list the expressed powers that you know Congress has, and then I would determine how they could potentially connect to repealing a law. So our first person said Congress could use their expressed constitutional power of regulating commerce. Nice. They're referring to the Interstate Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause gives Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce, which includes the ability to regulate economic activity, either occurring between the states or greatly affecting the states. They could use this ability of regulating commerce to address the situation described above. I think that is pretty dang close to perfect. And let's look at what the rubric says. The student must identify either the tax or spend or commerce clause, ding, 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 and then explain how the substance of either clause might empower Congress to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So that person would have gotten the point. Let's see about number 2. Express powers of Congress include the ability to create new laws bypassing the ACA and cut funds or appropriate them elsewhere, limiting the ACA. Even though that's a little skimpy, I think it gets the credit. And then for number 3, Congress could use their power of the purse, woohoo, to cut tax state or communities that would not comply. So the wording here is a little interesting. I would encourage this person to maybe read through their answer again before they press submit here. Congress could also cut funding, ding, 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 if states did not comply. Very good. Now notice the second part of the rubric for A here says that identifying the necessary and proper clause would not suffice, as that clause describes implied and not expressed powers. Remember, guys, hang on. Sorry, folks, Wyatt was dangerously close to bonking his head. So again, the necessary and proper clause gives us those implied powers. Implied powers are not expressed, so those would not give you points for this one. Okay? Oh, looky, looky. Part B is asking for an express constitutional power of the president. So I would again use the same tactic that some of you used for Part A and just go through what are some express powers of the president that could actually be applicable here. Obviously, it's not commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but the power of veto should come to your brain. So person 1 said that one of the express constitutional powers of the president includes the ability to sign or veto legislation. Ding, 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 da-ding, ding, da-ding. This means whatever legislation comes to them, they can decide to make it a law or decide against that. The ability to sign or veto legislation is explicitly stated in the Constitution, which makes it an express constitutional power of the president. Voila, that is a fabulous answer. Look at the rubric. It says that in order to earn the point, the student should describe one express constitutional power of the president that is relevant to the scenario, namely the power to sign or veto bills approved by Congress. Yay, person one. Person two, the president has the express power of the veto, ding, 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 but cannot use that power on something signed into law by their predecessor. They can fail to, I imagine they wrote, execute the law through bureaucratic regulation and other enforcements. They can address the need for change in their State of the Union address. They can also call for a special session of Congress to discuss the ACA. Wow, this person really went a bunch of different directions here. I imagine they did that because they were a little concerned that some of their answers might not be expressed. But hey guys, as long as you've got one correct answer, even if all the others are incorrect answers, you still get the point. Just so you know, the person who answered number two listed all express powers though, so good job. Person two gets the point for B as well. Three, an express power of the president is the executive order. These orders bypass Congress and have the force of law. Most presidents issue hundreds of executive orders during the term. They're fast. This would have been a fabulous answer if I were asking for an implied power of the president. Remember, executive orders, they come from the Executive Power Clause, which says that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. So they are not expressly stated. So sadly, number three will not earn a point for this one. Okay. And then part C says that we need to explain how the division of powers between Congress and the POTUS influences the situation described above. Now, I'm guessing that when you guys saw division of powers, some of you immediately wanted to go the route of divided government. Although, hopefully you recall from the question, they referenced the fact that Trump and both houses of Congress were controlled by Republicans. So really, one would not need to bring up divided government here. So let's see what person one said. The separation of powers divides the government into independent branches with their own jobs, but they are still accountable for one another. Maybe to one another would be better there. Congress has the ability to make laws, and the president has the ability to enforce those laws made by Congress. In this situation, even though Congress made a law in the past, the president can choose not to enforce it as such, giving the president the ability to work with the new Congress to not fund or basically ignore that past Affordable Care Act. What the rubric was looking for here, the student has to describe how the Constitution divides lawmaking powers between the Congress and the president. And so Congress approves the bills, the president can sign or veto them. So this person previously mentioned the veto, I believe, in part B. So as long as they wrote that, they should be okay. And even though the rubric does not specifically mention executing the law, I think that answer would earn a point. Okay. But then the rubric goes on, and that cooperation between both branches of the government would likely be needed in this instance to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So C, you need to go a little bit beyond what you might initially think the question is asking or what they're looking for. So expand on your reasoning. You're going to hopefully have some time to do so. So I don't know about number one. What do you guys think? Number two, the division of power means that Congress makes the laws and president can sign or not. Okay, that's part of it. In a time of divided government, this can be challenging. Even though a simple majority is all that is needed to pass both chambers of Congress, other elements factor in: pigeonholing, log rolling, port barreling. This person is excited to use their vocab. If a few party members cross party lines, that can disrupt the party's attempt to make policy, as it is evidenced here. So that's alluding to cooperation, but not really expressly stating it. So I don't know, that's kind of up in the air whether that one would earn a point or not. I would, err on the side of caution and use more. Number three, the division of power between Congress and the president influenced the gridlock described above because both branches have the power to check each other. The president can veto Congress and issue executive orders, while Congress can override the POTUS and executive orders. Well, they can't really override executive orders. You would need to explain how Congress has the power of the purse and could potentially withhold funds to something the president had created through an executive order. A divided government would also contribute. So I don't think that one's specific enough. Part C, as you can tell, would be hard to earn full credit here. And I think it's that second element of the rubric that makes it a little bit more challenging. So Part C says, explain how the division of powers between Congress and the president influences the situation described above. So I think a lot of what we're doing is stating how the division of powers exists between the president and Congress, and not really explaining how it influences the situation above. So I would go more in detail for that one to get credit. Okay, so there you go, 2 FRQs. Next week, I'm going to give you a timed one. So I'll let you know what time I'll put it out there. I'll let you know what time you have to submit it. It'll be time stamped, and maybe that'll create a little pressure for you guys to get it in. If there's any issues with technology, that might give you a good idea of how that could also pose an issue the day of. I'm sure no one's going to struggle with technology on May 11th, right, guys? Hopefully these memes bring you some happiness and humor. And just know that I'm here with you, okay? So again, so sorry I had to cancel the Zoom. Thanks for tuning in for this. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll post next week's final review session schedule, okay? And then obviously the morning of the exam, I'll just kind of have an open Zoom for a while if anybody has any last-minute questions. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful weekend. Willow, say bye to my students.
I see Dory.
You do see Dory. Okay, bye, guys.